I want to welcome you. My name is Catherine Baker. I'm director of Where You Are, the UC Student and Policy Center. And before we get to welcome you and our many-time partners, CalMatters, and get to celebrate Dan, I did want to just take a show of hands. This is your first time coming to this building for an event or program? Okay, terrific. Well, we warmly welcome you. This UC Student and Policy Center is a relatively new presence of the University of California in the Capital community. It is a place meant for these types of convenings, good conversation in person together, talking about the issues of the day, including the ones that Dan has covered over his career, and with the hope that we leave the building more informed and making better decisions. It's also a place where we'd love to showcase the University of California and the contribution that we hope to make as our public service mission to the legislature and the broader community. So the last time you have to participate for my comments is raise your hand if you went to a UC. Okay, raise your hand if someone in your family went to the UC. Someone who's a total stranger that you probably walk by or work with. They've heard that from me before. That's the impact of the state's second largest employer. And so we're very happy to welcome you here. We have a couple of other programs coming up that we'd like to be sure you know you are welcome to. We have a California Leaders Speakers Series where we visit with leaders from across the state. And we have former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and former Congressman Javier Becerra coming for a fireside chat on October 6th during the lunch hour. So please come and join us for that. You can scan to register. We'll have some flyers out front as well. And it's an opportunity to hear from him, his leadership journey, his vision for leaders in the state, and ask him questions. So please join us. And then on October 17th, we have the second in the series, and that's with former Congresswoman Katie Porter, and also get to ask about her leadership, what her interest is for our state. This speaker series is a bipartisan speaker series. We've had leaders from both parties join us and from across the state, and these are our two upcoming opportunities. And we are delighted to get to welcome CalMatters at any time here at the center. We have other partnerships that we do. I think I can say this, just save the date, October 14th, for a great debate on Prop 50. It is not going to be a presidential-style debate. It'll actually be meaningful and useful. And they also have a terrific voter guide. So with that, I'm very happy to welcome you. You have a great program today. Thank you to CalMatters for having this, and I'm going to turn it over to Neil. Thank you, Neil. All
right. Catherine, thank you. I just want to thank you for what you've done, both for being a great partner to us on events like this and for what you've built here, just in a relatively short time. It's an amazing facility, and just walk by anytime. There's always great stuff happening here. Really happy to be partners with you. I want to do a couple things real quick before we get started. One is the brand new editor of the Sacramento Bee is here, and I just want to ask Greg Fusco to stand up and say hello real quickly. Greg is a longtime journalist and, among other things, came to us from the Press Democrat in Santa Rosa, once at the Chicago Sun-Times with another guy named Gregory who was an editor of the Sacramento Bee, Gregory Favre, who's over here in the corner, our member of our board. Gregory's been a huge supporter of ours and a great friend to us over the years, and so welcome to you both. We also have a number of folks who sponsored this, and we're really grateful to the people who supported it. You can see their logos up on the screen, but real quickly, Boleto Vineyards, Bicker Castillo and Fairbanks, Bogle Family Vineyards, California Forward, the California Retailers Association, Cal Nonprofits, of which we are a member, California State Association of Counties, CSAC, the DeVoe Burr Group, Iron Horse Vineyards, you can see a wine theme here, the James Irvine Foundation, KP Public Affairs, they're in the house with us. The League of California Cities, Lucas Public Affairs, welcome. Lyft, Marin Clean Energy, the NorCal Carpenters Union, Niemela Pappas and Associates, Perry Communications, also here with us. Yeah, there we go. Rural County Representatives of California, San Jose Clean Energy, and the Sierra Health Foundation. Thanks to you all for making this happen. It is a testament, I think, to the support in the community of this kind of conversation, and a testament to the fact that a lot of people think you're pretty important, apparently. They want to make sure they were sponsors of this. So thank you, Dan, for being you. Grab a chair. If you would, why don't we sit in the middle there together? it's turned on. It is. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Walters.
Yeah, thanks, Neil.
It's on.
Okay.
It has been a real privilege for me over the past 6.5 years at CalMatters to be working with Dan. And among the many things that I get a kick out of is watching some of the journalists who are newer in the business spend some time with him, often with remarks like, "Oh, we studied you in school," things like that. We're going to stay away from the jokes today about Mark Twain and such, and try to talk a little bit about 50 years of covering the Capitol and how much things have changed or haven't changed in that time. I've also got some questions a lot of you submitted with your RSVPs, so thank you for those good questions. We'll share some of those as well. Can I start by taking you back more than 50 years, if that's okay?
Well, depends on how far you went. I was born in...
Yes. The first time that, as I understand it, the authorities tried to shut down your right to be a journalist in high school.
Oh, yeah. I got kicked out of high school for being a journalist.
Tell us more about that, because it seems to be happening today as well.
Yeah, it's... I was the editor of the... I was a junior, and I was the editor of the paper down in Lancaster. The student newspaper we called the Sandpaper. Great name. And they kind of got in trouble a few times for some editorials I wrote. But then they had an election in the school district there, and it was a tax election, and it failed to raise taxes, and so there had been a threat to stop athletics. So the captain of the football team, who was also in student government with me, a guy named Hugh Bickle, who is a well-known glider pilot, by the way, an international glider pilot, lives over in Hollister now. He decided to organize a demonstration against the outcome of this election. He was on the football team, and it was football players mostly. So I went to school I didn't know that was happening. And then I went to school, and he buttonholed me right away and said, "Well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to walk out of class, and we're going to demonstrate against this outcome." He said, "Will you tell the local newspaper?" So in those days you didn't have cell phones, right? 1960. So I went into the school office to use the phone, and I did call the paper and tell them this was going to be happening. Well, somebody overheard that. So when it actually happened, the principal kind of lost his cool about the whole thing and kicked out Hugh Bickle and myself out of school. Hugh for organizing it, me for calling the newspaper and telling him about it. And so we were out of school for about a week, and then they let us back in. And the worst thing about it was that it was the week of the junior-senior prom. So my girlfriend actually had to go to the prom with my younger brother. That was the worst thing about it. Although the principal, whose name was Zeitlin, said that if we protested this suspension, if I protested the suspension, went to the school board or anything, he would make sure that all of this stuff showed up in my permanent file someplace, and I would never be able to get a job with the government. That was a kind of a tip-off to me that, these people aren't to be trusted. And I said, if I caused all this trouble that was a lot of fun, actually, in a way, to cause all this trouble. And I said, well, this is a pretty nice thing to do. So about 4 or 5 months later, my family had moved up to Eureka. And about 4 or 5 months later, I dropped out of high school, went to work on the Humboldt Times on the day after Labor Day, 1960, at the ripe old age of 16. And actually, I didn't drop out of high school right away, but a couple of months later, because it was more fun playing poker at night at the newspaper. It was a morning paper, so we worked till midnight every night. More fun playing poker than it was to go to high school, so I dropped out. I actually have enough credits to graduate from high school. I just never finished one required class, which was civics. There it is.
Feels like maybe we could do something about that. There's a few people here have connections in the education system.
No.
You're probably never getting a government job, by the way. Your file's
Probably
a real
won't.
mess now.
Probably won't.
Not a chance. Fast forward to today, when we have various conversations about suppression of the media and the right to do anything from call the local paper to have a comedy show on TV to all the other things a lot of us do for a living and maybe never fully took for granted, but it's sometimes, I think, in our careers have taken the sense that we had some kind of protections. Does it feel any different now? Is it worse right now for journalists than it was before, or are we all just not remembering well?
I think it's worse, but not necessarily for repression. I think it's that the halls of government in California and local office and certainly in Washington have just become so damn complicated. When I started covering the Capitol in 1975, the governor had 2 people in his press office, both of them former wire service reporters. Bill Stahl and David, what was his name? I can't remember now. One guy from the AP and one guy from UPI. And that was it. That was the entire staff of Jerry Brown's press office. Now there's so many people over there, they don't know what to do with them all. And that's also gone out into the state agencies, which used to have civil service press people, and now they're all political appointees, and their job is just to stonewall anything that they possibly can. So it's not so much repression in a sense as this, that there are more barriers to reaching people and talking to them. They all have all our legislators now have press people. None of them had press people. No, the Speaker of the House and the President Pro Tem of the Senate had one person each, and that was it. No, the run-of-the-mill legislators didn't have press people. You talk to them on the floor. You got them off the floor, talk to them, or whatever you want to do. Now you got to go through 17 layers of thing, and what do you want to talk about? What questions do you want to ask? And blah, blah, all this stuff. It's just that the whole thing has become a thicket of barriers to get around. The good side of all of that is that the basic information that you need, like a copy of the bill or an analysis or something, this is now what you used to have to go to the bill room to get a copy of the bill, go to the committee room to get a copy of the analysis, all this stuff. Now it's all online, as are the sessions, and that is easier. The bread and butter stuff is kind of easier, but dealing with the people is, and I think there's one other aspect to this, and that is, and I think the same thing is true in Washington, one-party government naturally thinks it doesn't have to be answerable to anyone, whether it's the Trump White House or the Gavin Newsom governorship and the legislature. They can just stiff you. And what's the penalty? There is no penalty because it's a one-party government. And one-party governments lead to secrecy and manipulation. And that's true in California, and it's true in Washington. It's not a partisan thing. It's the nature of politics, the nature of politicians to want to control their own images. And they can do it because there's no other opposition to tell them they can't do it. The opposition is powerless, the Republicans in Sacramento, the Democrats in Washington, so they can just do any damn thing they want to do, and they don't have to answer to anybody. And I think that's the biggest problem that I see.
Of course, one of the other prompting roles or ways that information comes out is the presence of a healthy press corps.
Yes, it is.
And there was a time, at least in the 25 plus years ago, when there were 150 journalists roughly assigned to cover the Capitol, just cover the building. They were reporters from wire services and news organizations. They were bureau people, bureau chiefs from all over the state who came to the Sacramento to cover the state government on behalf of the people who were in their communities. Were things well covered then? Did people know what was going on? Do they know more then than they know now?
They do know more then than they do now. If you go back to the 70s, 80s, maybe even to the 90s, almost every newspaper of any size at all had a bureau in Sacramento. Places like Riverside and San Bernardino and Santa Rosa and even Chico and Ventura and on, Orange County, San Diego. All these newspapers in all these communities had at least one person in the Capitol. And what do? They watch their local guys. They watch how they do it. And I could sit here for another hour and tell you stories of how those local reporters sunk political careers by exposing what some of their local guys were doing.
Tell us at least one. Don't do that and not tell us at least one of those stories.
I'll tell you, Vic Pollard, who was a reporter for the San Bernardino Sun and later for the paper in Bakersfield, destroyed one assemblyman by just reporting on all his tortured business dealings that involved casinos and all sorts of stuff that he was hiding from the public. Just destroyed his whole career. He went belly up. And he later landed in prison over in San Francisco for doing a fraud. My favorite story, though, is...
Wait, the legislator or the journalist?
No, yeah, the legislator, thank God. My favorite story about that involves a fellow by the name of late Virgil Meibert, who worked for the Oakland Tribune for many, many years. And Virgil watched his flock of politicians. They were from the East Bay, and that means they were all a little dicey to begin with because they were from the East Bay. And he watched them like a hawk. So there was this guy... God, I've got to remember this name now. I'll just use it. There was a very wealthy man in the Bay Area who always wanted a bill passed in the legislature. And he had a lot of influence, a lot of political influence. He had a bank, he had an airline. I can't remember his name now. Anyway, every year there was a bill that he sponsored that somebody in the East Bay delegation had to carry because it was just they had to do it. And Virgil Meibert would find out about that bill every year, and he would write about it, and the bill would be dropped every year. So one year, Ed Daly was his name. Ed Daly bill was one year, was in committee in the assembly, and Virgil was there. And the people from Ed Daly's, I think he had a bank and he had an airline, I think it was a banking bill, were there. And Bill Lockyer, who was from the East Bay area, Senator Lockyer was an assemblyman then, I think, walked into the room just to kind of let the people from Ed Daly know he was interested in their welfare. And he saw Virgil sitting there. So he walked down the hall where the guy who was carrying the bill, Elihu Harris, was presiding over another committee. And he went up and he told Elihu, hey, Virgil's there to watch this bill. So as a result of Virgil sitting there, Elihu Harris refused to walk down the hall and take up his bill because he did not want to be exposed in the Oakland Tribune. He knew what would happen. And it really pissed off the people from Ed Daly's. They tried to get him to take, no, not going to take up the bill. So there's a very classic example of how the local newspaper reporter watching their flock of legislators kind of kept them. None of those people exist today. So there is nobody watching out for what the people from San Gabriel Valley, which was one called the corridor of corruption by the former assembly speaker, nobody's watching them, what they're doing. Nobody's watching the people from Orange County or all these other places that used to have people reporters. They can get away with anything. The only thing people know in their districts is what they tell them. Nothing more. And that's a shame. It really is a shame.
Very true. You've seen a lot of, maybe bad's not the right word, a lot of people do things in this town that were not necessarily in the public interest or the best thing to do for California. Who are a few of the people you've seen come through this state government who you thought really had the people at heart, really wanted to do a good job, did something good, were just here to do their job, and who you actually admired?
What I think is that I think probably most of the people who get elected to the legislature come here with good intentions. And then they get here and they find out that doing what they wanted to do is essentially impossible. They had to, fall in line, do what the major interest groups wanted them to do, what the party wanted them to do, what their party leaders wanted them to do. And that was it. But my favorite guy of all this, and there were a lot of good legislators. I mean, there were people. I think that the quality of the legislators, I mean, in terms of intellect, was much higher at one time. They were individuals rather than simply being, somebody gets tapped on the shoulder and say, you're it. You get to go to the legislature for a couple of terms. But my favorite guy was a guy named Newt Russell. Newt Russell was what you might call a stickler. He was a Republican senator from Southern California. And by the way, his brother, John Russell, was a well-known actor who had his own TV show. Played a cowboy, had his own TV show back in the 60s. Newt would go over bills. I mean, he would actually read the bills, which is like heresy in the Capitol. All you're supposed to do is go to the analysis and look at the last thing on the analysis, who's for it and who's against it. That's all you have to do, really. And that's all most people do. But he actually read the bills, and he would get up, and he would talk about these bills and what the permutations was. He took his job seriously. Seriously. But that was rare. I mean, it was rare. There were others who tried to do that. But I think that what happens is that, and this is pre-term limits, and I can argue term limits 49, 51 either way. But pre-term limits, I think people had more of a sense of, I don't know exactly call it duty exactly, but they were going to be there a long time, theoretically. And that could be good or bad, depending on who you were. But I think in some ways, the legislature back in the 70s, and particularly in the 80s, was much more corrupt than it is now. But it was a kind of a weird corruption. And it harkened back to the Artie Samish days. Artie Samish used to get people elected corruptly, so they protect his clients, which were in the liquor and transportation business, horse racing. And he didn't care what else they did. And when he wrote a book about all this, he said, these guys turned out to be some pretty good legislators as long as they protected my clients. And I think that was true, generally speaking, that there was even some of the more corrupt, include that guy that went to prison I've mentioned earlier, actually carried some very good legislation. And they had a kind of a sense that, as long as I play the game and take care of this interest and that interest, I can do whatever else I want. They don't care as long as you play the game. And I think that in a way, some of the legislating was much more serious then. Listen, they used to have hearings on bills over there at night. And they would go on for hours and hours. None of this, okay, you get 2 minutes, everybody else just mention your name, which is the common hearing today. And everybody knows in advance what's going to happen beforehand. They're charades. They don't mean anything. There's no real committee work being done. But in those days, people would actually go to these, and they would go through those bills, and they would fight over this point and that point and this point and that point, and it would go on for hours sometimes. And they were very serious about legislating that the committee process worked. I don't think the committee process works at all now. And the worst of them all, of course, being the appropriations committees, where they just announce, this bill's in, this bill's out, this bill's in, this bill's out. No explanation, no nothing, just, and this will go in, and this will be amended and go out. And that's not legislating, that's something else. I don't know what it is. But I think they were really more serious about it once upon a time. You had some real expertise, people who had been here a long time and really had expertise in certain areas. I don't think that the quality intellectually today is what it was once upon a time.
That idea of, I won't make you do all the arguments on both sides of term limits, but that balance of people not being here forever versus having the expertise, the experience. There's a reason that a lot of your columns today have a lot of depth and historical information in them and background, and we often find out it's not the first time we've seen something because you've got that experience and you bring it. Is that missing now? Have we lost that?
Well, I think we've lost it in several respects. We've lost it because of this declined press corps. That's one way that's been lost to a certain extent. We're not out there. There's not enough people, a lot of people out there, looking at what's going on. So we've lost it in that sense. But we've lost it. The term limit thing is a very interesting thing. It changed the legislature dramatically, kind of. And I say kind of because when term limits were passed back in 1990, and in the time after that, there were other things going on. California was changing. There were not only term limits, but there were also redistricting, a pretty upsetting redistricting after the 1990 census. So the makeup of the legislature changed dramatically, a huge turnover over the next 8 or 10 years in the legislature because of term limits and because of redistricting, which also creates a great turnover. The legislature became less a club of middle-aged white men, or sometimes aged white men, and more reflected in ethnic terms and in gender terms and all other terms, much more reflective of California as a whole. And that's the good thing about term limits, okay, is that it made the legislature more diverse as California was becoming much more diverse. But the flip side of it, and why you can argue it both ways, is that the people then who came here did not have the expertise, even because of term limits, and also because of the arrival eventually of the single-party House, the single-party legislature, which meant that they didn't have to put out the effort because they were all protected. None of them had to face political music of having somebody from the other party challenge them in an election and have a chance of knocking them off. And I think for both of those reasons, both the makeup and the procedures and the results of the legislature changed dramatically after term limits, but it wasn't only because of term limits. There were other things going on, and how to ascribe what share of that change to term limits and what share to be influenced by these other factors is a very difficult thing to do, and I don't think it really can be done. So yes, there was a big change, but was it all because of term limits? Not necessarily. There were other things going on.
Yeah. You mentioned the diversity of the legislature reflecting the diversity of California as the population changed over time, or maybe catching up with a population that had already changed by the time the legislature
that's actually
became
more
more
accurate,
diverse, right? Does that mean that more people in California are better represented now because the legislature is more diverse? Are the people who may not have been in the legislature 50 years ago who are there now, are they able to do a better job representing all of their constituents?
Well, in theory, they can. They bring more experiences to the table.
We don't pay you to write theories. We pay you to tell what's actually happening.
I think what happens is because it's a one-party situation, there's no real, they don't make the effort because there's no penalty for failure. It becomes a comfortable situation. You can show up, you go to the hearings, you sit there while the chairman goes through all the rigmarole of 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there, everybody else name their name. There's no real stuff going on. I was very kicked, I got a kick out of the fact that exposed by Ryan Sabolo in CalMatters recently, that there's actually an unwritten rule that you're never to discuss content at a committee hearing. What? I mean, what the hell? That you're not supposed to discuss anything serious content at a committee hearing. You're just supposed to sit there while the chairman goes through all the 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there, everybody else line up and give their names. And there's something wrong with that. Because from personal experience, I can tell you that once upon a time, there was a lot of stuff going on in committee hearings, and they did discuss, as I mentioned before. They would have hearings at night that would go on for hours. They'd go till midnight to work out a bill and take it up. I mean, some strange, let me tell you just one story about a nighttime hearing. So Jerry Brown had this bill to build the peripheral canal. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? He's come and gone twice, and there's still no peripheral canal or tunnel or anything else. But he had his peripheral canal bill up, and it was in the Ag and Water Committee in the Senate. And Ruben Ayala, who was the chairman of the committee, was carrying the peripheral canal bill. So it was up, and the committee was divided. And like a lot of water things, it had really nothing to do with party. You know, water things are beyond party. And so they were having this hearing, and the swing vote, I Yeah, I'll mention his name. It was a guy named Garcia. He was from Los Angeles. He was a notorious alcoholic. And this was a night hearing. And the mayor of Los Angeles had assigned his water lobbyist, Ray Corley, some of you might know, to babysit Garcia and get him to the hearing sober enough to vote for the bill. So the hearing starts, and Garcia's there, and there are two doors to the hearing room, and Corley is standing guard at one of them. So they start talking about this bill, and you could see Garcia just getting the shakes. Shakes and shakes. And suddenly he just gets up and bolts out of the door that's unguarded. And Ray Corley heads out after him. And they come back after about 45 minutes or something, and I asked Ray, I said, oh, he was over at David's. I let him have a couple of pops to settle himself up. Got him back over here. So they keep on talking about the bill. And Garcia's starting to get the shakes again. And he says to Ruben Ayala, who's carrying the bill, I'm going to go again, and I'm not going to come back this time. So the opponents of the bill then started talking really, really slow. And they started offering amendments to the bill, and Garcia, in his case, was voting for amendments that would have killed the bill. And they had to get all that straightened out. And at one point, Ayala goes over to Garcia and says something to him in Spanish, and he just like this, kind of Joel. I don't know what he said. It was something that got his attention, I'll tell you. So they finally got the bill out. Okay, so this is late at night, 9, 10 o'clock. I worked on a morning paper, the Sacramento Union. I went back to the office and hustled the story out about all this stuff, and the Garcia leaving and kind of had to come back and all that. They got the bill out. The Sacramento Bee, being the Sacramento Bee, had about 4 paragraphs just said the bill got out. No color whatsoever, because that was the Sacramento Bee. They had just, no color. So, and there was never a word about it in the Los Angeles Times, even though the Los Angeles Times reporter was there in the room, a guy named Bill Rood. So I saw Bill sometime after that, and I said, why didn't you have a story about all that? I mean, you got the mayor having these lobbyists there, and you got Garcia, who was from Los Angeles, and all this stuff that was going on, and in and out of the hearing room and everything. He said he wrote it all up. And it went upstairs, he said, and was never seen again. Because, he was told, the editor of the LA Times didn't think it didn't make Tom Bradley look very good. But that's one, that when I talk about these bills and going at night hearings, that's a good thing. They went, and they went, and they went, and they went. And so they used to actually thrash these things out in here. And if you wanted to see it, of course, no television, you had to go there and watch it all happen.
About 6, 7 more hours of stories if we all want to get comfortable?
No, we haven't even started on Jerry Brown campaign stories. Those get really interesting.
I want to talk a little bit about CalMatters at some point here, but one more question. As you think about the folks you've seen and the governors, you've covered a number of governors.
7
twice.
if you count Jerry Brown twice.
If you count Jerry Brown twice. Who stands out as having done either the most or something extraordinary that had a profound impact on California, if any?
I think that probably. I'm gonna commit heresy there and thing. I think in some ways the most interesting governor was the dullest. No, he wasn't the dullest. The second dullest governor, Pete Wilson. I mean, Duke Mason maybe Gray Davis is number 1. Maybe he's number 3.
One of the 3 dullest of the 7.
Yeah, one of the dullest. I mean, his public personality was terrible. He was quite charming and everything in private, but publicly he was just kind of wooden and everything. But I admired Pete Wilson for one reason. First of all, he came into office really wanting to do something. He was a great proponent of what he called preventive government, that you should have things that prevent problems from occurring rather than waiting for them to occur and responding to them. And he had several specific things in mind. But he had the worst fortune of any governor in my experience. Every single county in California was declared a disaster area at least once during his governorship. They had floods, they had riots, they had earthquake. Everything that could possibly happen in California happened during Pete Wilson's governorship, particularly in his first term. And he just kind of said to himself, I think, he actually said, I could hear him, Well, that's the hand I was dealt. So I'll play it. He wound up kind of wanting to do these kind of farce, kind of being if you know the term, Tory reformer. Does that grab you? That's a phrase out of 19th century England about Tory reformers. And he was going to be a Tory reformer, but he got stuck in the business of being a crisis manager. And he just kind of shrugged his shoulders in a way and said, well, that's life, and I'll do the job. And then he did the job. So I admire him for that reason. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to, shovel off the job to somebody else. He actually did the job. So I find that admirable. Now, in terms of lasting effect, I think it would be probably Jerry Brown, because the interesting thing about Jerry is that he was a spoiled brat in his first term, in his first governorship. He was just a snot-nosed, he was basically a snot-nosed, he's 5 years older than I am, but he really acted as a kid. And the people around him, his people, considered him to be a kid, as somebody who, they had to, he wouldn't even have clean underwear unless somebody had it, got it for him or something like that. He was a very kind of a spoiled brat. And he acted. He ran for president a year after becoming governor, and he ran for president again. He was not interested in being governor really so much as he wanted to do something else. He had a short attention span. And I think he came back into the governorship because he wanted to kind of erase that. And in the second governorship, he came back as a very mature, engaged governor who had some things he wanted and needed to do, and he did them. And I think probably things like, bucking everybody else and getting a gas tax increase, for example, to start fixing some of the crappy roads we have in this state, things like that. And he did balance the budget, and he did all that. And he did stuff that was real governing, and was very adept at it. And so I give him credit for that. And I think that has a longer term effect. 7 governors, and that's 2 stories. I could tell you 5 more stories probably, but that's 2 stories.
Well, thank you. Let me ask a couple of people to join us. Your mention of Jerry Brown's campaign was a good segue to somebody who covered it. We have in the room, as I mentioned before, Gregory Favre, who was the founding editor at CalMatters and long board member since day one. And we have David Lesher, who built this idea, put it together, was the founding CEO, became the editor after that, and has led this organization through, starting with 4 or 5 people, 6 people, and all the way up to where we are now with 80 people and a $15 million budget. And Dave, I want to ask you to join me, as well as Kristen Go, who's our current editor, been with us about 2 years, and didn't found CalMatters, but has taken us to extraordinary lengths. I'm going to slide over and let you get closer to the middle, since she joined us. And talk a little bit about the intersection. There we go. The intersection of Dan's 50 years covering this town and that building down the street, and 10 years of CalMatters. Because, in a sense, they're closely linked. I thought you might walk us through, Dave, real quick, a little bit of how we got from let's start CalMatters to the point where Dan joined.
Wow. Okay, try starting a brand new news organization in the middle of a state as big as California. There was a lot of headwind. A lot had to go right. A lot of people were involved. It wasn't just me by a long shot. But in our first year, the Speaker's office tweeted that we were Scam Matters. The Air Resources Board would call news organizations running our stories and tell them not to run our stories. And our first reporter had to clean out our desk within 24 hours because she joined CalMatters. But when Dan came, in our second year?
No, it was
third year.
2017, probably the
second year.
No, second year.
Yeah. We were still very small, and we were still becoming known in the Capitol. And they
didn't have a space in their office for me. They were sharing quarters with the public radio over here.
KQED space, yeah. But it said a lot. Dan was his own brand. Dan was an institution in Sacramento. Dan was well known, and I think it said a lot about the institution and trends in media, but also about CalMatters at that time, that this was a place that was going to have integrity and really talented people. And I think one of the reasons we were successful in those early years was because of the talent that we brought on. Our first reporter was Laurel Rosenhall, 15 years at the Bee, and then now at the New York Times. We brought on Julie Cart, Pulitzer Prize winner at the LA Times for environmental coverage. This was a news organization that didn't start, with, low-cost, inexperienced reporters. We hired reporters who were experts on their beat, who knew how the process worked, knew how to write. And I think the turning point for CalMatters to me was like when we got airborne was year 3. And then Neil came in shortly after that because we were growing, but it was because of the talent that we had that we kind of overcame those headwinds in the early years, and we won 4 awards, national awards, in our 3rd year. And it was a big turning point to me. I remember the moment to me. I was accepting an award in Detroit for first place at O&A for CalMatters, and Neil took a picture of me, and I still have that on my wall at home. So,
one of my few photographic accomplishments. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about the conversation that led to Dan joining CalMatters.
You want me to
We
tell
can make you
Yeah,
tell
go
the story.
ahead.
You want me to tell the story?
Yeah.
I had been working for the Sacramento Bee for
Can
30.
you hold the mic up a little bit?
I had been working for the Sacramento Bee for 33 years, and after Gregory Fobb hired me during the 1984 Democratic Convention in San Francisco, and I was getting a sense that, I hate to say this, but that the Bee wasn't being a very good newspaper anymore. There was obviously having financial troubles, and it was showing up, and I don't know. There was you just get that feeling that it was time to, just like I had gotten the feeling in '84, it was time to leave the Sacramento Union and go to the Bee. I just this feeling that it's time to leave the Bee and go someplace else. And where could I go? Well, CalMatters. So I contacted Dave, and I said, I'm going to leave the Bee. So you want? I said, I think the exact words I used is, "You know what I do, Dave. Do you want to hire me?" And that was about it. And I had a meeting with him, and Marcia was in the publisher, and I went to work for CalMatters. I had some. There were some other reasons for it. My wife had just had a stroke, and she was going to need a lot more of my attention. She finally died 2 years ago, after 6 years of dealing with it. So that was one. That was a contributing factor. There was just a whole bunch of different contributing. Said it's time to go, and I either retire or go to work someplace else.
And there was about 48 hours between the time you said you were leaving the Bee publicly and when publicly said you were joining CalMatters, and Dan was showered with accolades of what a great career, because they thought he was retiring.
Yeah, they were even going to have a resolution commending me on my retirement in the legislature.
Yeah. But a lot of people said
There's
a
a
lot of
resolution
nice things
thanking you
about
for leaving the legislature. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Let's pivot a little bit to something a little more recent, which is, Kristen, you're at a large national newspaper that also feels like it isn't what it used to be, and thinking about what's next, and decided to come join us here at CalMatters, which I was very grateful for. Talk a little bit about your first couple of years here and what you had when you got here, and kind of where we've gone, where you see it going.
Yeah, I remember when CalMatters launched. I was at the San Francisco Chronicle, and we had partnership to run CalMatters stories. And what I always appreciated about the stories were they were stories you couldn't find anywhere else. And it came at a time where the Chronicle was cutting its Capitol Bureau and the presence there. And we tried hiring Laurel, and Laurel's like, "No, I really like this CalMatters place. I want to make it work." And I think that we had tremendous respect for that, but also the stories. And so I left the Chronicle and worked at other places. But before coming to CalMatters, I I was at USA Today, and I had the opportunity to look, nationwide at what was happening and cover stories there. But it was also a place that was very much driven on metrics. And for those of you who are probably somewhat familiar with metrics, that means you're paying attention to what the audience wants. And if the audience wants a whole lot of Taylor Swift stories, you're going to give them a whole lot of Taylor Swift stories. But that may not always be what the audience needs. And so trying to find...
The audience would say they need the Taylor Swift stories.
Yes. But so trying to find the balance between, the journalism that matters in your day-to-day life, along with the fun things that you want to read, was becoming incredibly difficult. And so I grew up in California. I grew up in the Central Valley. And when Neil reached out to me and was like, hey, we have this job open, I was like, oh yeah, CalMatters. I think Dave and I had talked at one point too about CalMatters. What has always struck me was still the same, was that the kinds of stories that CalMatters told weren't being told anywhere else, and that's because of the dwindling press corps. And the ability to tell those stories that do matter was incredibly attractive, and that's why I came, and because I knew that coming here meant we would be able to make a difference, continue making a difference in terms of the legislation that was passed, in terms of holding our state leaders accountable, in terms of making sure that our government is working the way that it should, when it should. And so we've been able to do that over the past, build off of what Dave and others have built. When just in this first part of the year, our reporting has led to federal investigations, state investigations. The DMV copied one of the tools that we made so that you can, if your car has been taken over or repossessed by the state, that you can find if that was your car and if it was sold. Imagine that. You can get your money back for that. So we've been able to do some of that work thanks to this nonprofit model that was very rare when Dave and others first started it, but has become pretty prolific. But now we are actually seen as one of the models. We merged last year with the Markup, which is a tech nonprofit, to look at tech for good. And when you think about where California sits in terms of technology companies and what we are doing here and the number of policies aimed at tech, it made perfect sense for us. Again, we are now at 80 plus folks. And by me coming on, it allowed Dave to work on his new passion project, which he had envisioned from day one, which is digital democracy. And I think that's one of the most exciting things that we have going on. And I don't want to steal your thunder, so you should talk about digital democracy.
Briefly.
Yeah. So I think digital democracy comes out of CalMatters in a very great way, because CalMatters to me was explanatory journalism. It was different than other news organizations. It wasn't politics like Politico. It wasn't investigative like ProPublica. It wasn't even traditional state government coverage like Texas Tribune. It was, we're not going to do the turn of the screw daily stories. We're going to do this. There were three things we told the reporters. What's the issue? Why is it the way it is because of the politics and the interests involved? And what does it mean to you? And so, to the whole premise to me was to encourage civic engagement, to make it possible for people who care about this stuff to understand what's happening and to get involved. So the CalMatters was the layer of explanatory journalism, and digital democracy is all about using technology to create more transparency in the policymaking process. So you can see the bills, the votes, the legislation, the money, all the different pieces of it. And when you can put it all together, the magic of the technology now, we actually tried this in the first year and we utterly failed. Of all the difficulties in the first year, we got a lot of money to build it and it didn't work. So anyway, this time it's working very well. But all this kitchen sink of data is coming into one database that we own and that we built, but it's all public government data. And then you can query it across all these different data sources with one query. And as opposed to get the answer to that one question you ask, you'd have to go to 6 or 7 different sources throughout state government. And so it's very powerful. And it has created a lot of opportunities for storytelling. There's actually an AI layer to it that goes over the data and looks for story ideas for reporters to write. And when it sees one, it writes up a one-page, we call it a tip sheet, about here's what a story should be or it might be. And we've now given over 100 reporters around California access to those tip sheets. So you can sign up for your tip sheet and get a story idea, that's filtered by whatever you want, geography, topic, legislator, bill number, whatever you want. So I think it's kind of the cutting edge of where technology and journalism and state policy coverage is going to go, and it's exciting.
So you say it's the cutting edge, it's where it's going, but you've also brought us back to what Dan described earlier, where a lot of publishers had a bureau, one or more people in Sacramento doing that work, telling you what your local legislator was doing. And by doing this work and then giving it out to reporters all over the state, you're kind of bringing back that capability, which Dan, might have made your job a little bit easier instead of having to run around to 12 different rooms to do every story, right?
Much easier. I use it all the time.
There you go. That's the best user endorsement we have. Dan uses it all the time. I want to take a little bit of time here for your questions, and I know there are probably a lot of them here. We have a couple microphones that will come around. We're recording this, so we'll ask you wait until the microphone gets to you to ask your question. But if anybody wants to raise their hand and ask a question, the three of us won't be offended if all the questions are for Dan, because that's why we're here.
Thank you.
By the way, I should say this is Hillary Abramson, who was a kick-ass reporter for both the Sacramento Union and the Sacramento Bee.
Thank you, Dan. Oh. Thank you, Dan. Dan,
Yes,
I wonder if anyone's
Hillary?
ever asked you this. Is there a story you regret having written? Is there a story that was wrong or not done well enough in your judgment?
That's an interesting case. I occasionally just go back through my files of columns for like the last year or something and kind of look through all of them. And I do find things that I wish I'd have just done a little bit differently or something like that. There was one this week that after the fact, I thought should be done a little differently. It expanded the import of it a little bit better than I did. So yeah, I've been sued for libel twice, both times at the Sacramento Union. One of them was for the second column I ever wrote for the Union. That went to trial down in Stockton. Fortunately, we won the case. And the second one happened a few years later, and I was sued by the University of Phoenix for daring to write about how they were trying to operate in California without getting accreditation by pulling political strings. And they took great umbrage at that and sued me. And the judge declared, the trial judge declared that there was no case. They appealed to the appellate court in Sacramento, and the appellate court agreed there was no case. So would I have done those stories differently if I had known I was going to be sued for libel? Maybe a little bit, but I think both of the stories were actually quite accurate, and the fact that people resented them told me they were right on.
Just imagining being your editor and finding out the second story you wrote already has us in court. Another question for Dan.
Hi, I'm Irina Asmussen. I used to oversee the forecasts at the Department of Finance, so I am very proud of the fact that, Dan, you have made fun of my forecasts. I have a question. So, Kristen, you mentioned that there's metrics, and I feel like by consenting to all of this tracking, we as consumers of news are also sort of like, being stuck in our own algorithmic hells. How would you want to fix this if you could sort of persuade your readers to approach news differently? That's a question for all of you.
Wow, that's a big question. That's a $64 billion question there. From my standpoint, you just keep plugging away. Just keep presenting to people things that you think they should know, or that are interesting, that are important, are pertinent, and I guess hope for the best, because you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them drink, basically. But on the other hand, if you fill your stories with all this clickbait crap, I think you're basically discouraging the readers to read the serious stuff by giving them all the clickbait crap.
And I think the moving target there is just the consumer habits of how people consume news and where they get it. And so just since CalMatters has been here, that has changed a lot. And so and it's still changing. And I mean, keeping up with where to put the news, how to present it, how to write it, is part of that algorithm. I mean, I think you have to have a premise as a journalist that there are people out there who care. Because if there's not, we're all in trouble. But you got to assume that, and then you do the best you can to tell them what they need to know in however shape that comes.
And I would add that if you're getting your news from social media, you are not getting an accurate portrayal of what's happening in the world, because that's where the algorithms serve you versus the different perspectives. And so thinking about how you're getting your news and consuming your news is really important. Like at CalMatters, that's why we are on NPR. All of the NPR affiliates, we are providing information for. We have our own app so that you can come directly to us. We have our newsletter. Many news organizations have this. We happen to be free, and that helps us be able to determine what kinds of stories that we want to and believe should be written versus an audience metric.
All that said, we do also feel a responsibility to see if we can't get ourselves more in front of people on social media and try to reach folks who are getting their news that way. In the interest of equal time on some of the things Dan said, let's go to our next question.
What do you think about the recent legislative attempts to prop up what I'll call the legacy media?
Neil has more opinion about that than I do, probably.
I think I'm too close to it. You should answer.
I appreciate the gesture. I don't like the permutations of it in many respects. The possibility that we then become a regulated utility, as it were. We're not on the slippery slope, but I think there's a slippery slope we could hit pretty easily if government becomes the main financer of media. And like I say, we're not there yet, but it's there in the background, I think, at all times that you could have that problem.
Yeah, and I've always thought of media as a public good when it's done professionally and well. I think democracy depends on an informed public and electorate. But I think the challenge is, how do you define media today? Good luck with that.
Imperfect solution at best, right? Is there another question right there?
I'm not sure it's working. Congratulations on 10 years. Thinking about social media, reaching out to the younger generations, encouraging them to consume news and to follow journalism. I have a background in journalism. I remember when I graduated, my professor said, don't go to journalism because print journalism is going to be dead in 25 years. But you guys are celebrating 10 years. So how are you going to reach those younger generations to be informed, not through social media only, but to really be educated on every part of the news cycle?
I don't think that's an undertaking that we can do on our own, right? Like my kids are 8 and 14. Do they look at a newspaper every single day? No. But do we talk about where should you get information from, right? Part of what, at least at my kids' school, they do learn what are good sources for information. And so we're constantly saying, well, where did you get that from? Where did you get that from? How do you get it? How do you get other perspectives? And so I think it's not just incumbent on us to think about where we put our information and how we reach, but it's also like a societal issue. Like, we know that places that have healthy news organizations have healthier democracies. And so that's like, what are you guys doing? You know, it's not just us. We are putting it out there. We have to put it out there. We should put it out there. But how are schools supporting that? How are you supporting that? How are other, like, a democracy works in many different ways, but we all have to participate. And that's part of what we need to make sure that we are doing that. One of the things that we did over the weekend, we just launched our voter guide for Prop 50. I'm surprised nobody's asked about that yet, but we just launched our voter guide, and we had a concert promoter reach out to us like, we want you there at our event. And we hadn't thought of concert promotion as a way to reach voters, but we're like, yes. Shame on us. And so was it Friday afternoon, we quickly designed a QR code and pamphlets, cards that we could pass out at the concert so that people could get information about Prop 50, about the pros and the cons and why it is actually on the ballot. So, there are still things that we are trying to learn, but if we are getting good requests, we'll think about how do we do this. We were on TikTok for the last election cycle. We will be again this year trying to get out good information. We've worked with influencers to say, here's our information. Would you mind working with us to spread this information because it needs to get out there?
Let's go to a question in the back of the room, and then we'll go over here.
I have another legacy media question. If the newspaper publishers could go back in time to the early mid-90s at the dawn of the age of the internet, do you think there were any steps they could have taken to stave off or perhaps avoid the decline that has been with us all these years?
That's a question you could probably answer better than anyone.
Yes and no. No, in the sense that until 1994, if you wanted to buy an ad and reach people in a community, there were only a few ways to do it. Billboards, television, radio, the newspaper. We had a monopoly on advertising. 1994, 1995, new tools came out that made advertising available everywhere around the world on millions of websites, and all of a sudden, we're competing with millions of places instead of a few places for the advertising revenue. That said, there are a lot of very smart people in this business who tried a few things that were pretty smart, and if the companies had invested more in that and pushed harder, we would be in a better place than we are today. At the same time, most of the innovation comes from people who are not sitting in the room having done the same thing year after year after year. Nothing personal. And so it almost takes somebody outside thinking about it. The smartest companies brought folks in from the outside to try to come up with ideas, and some did very well. But boy, would we like to go back and do a lot of things over? Sure, absolutely.
Just a quick, hello, Dan, how are you? So my question may be a little bit repetitive. I'm going to start out with, what do you feel the future of journalism is? And then in your previous answer, you were talking about how you're now using TikTok and influencers and all those folks, which I don't give a lot of credit to. But in 20 to 30 years, where do you see this profession and the media? And then you also say there were 150 journalists covering the Capitol. How many are covering it today? Be nice to me,
I think
Dan.
I'm not sure. I kind of got 150. I always thought it was around 75. Anyway, I mean, a lot of people had Capitol credentials that weren't actually covering, like all the TV cameramen and everything would have credentials, but they weren't there covering day to day. I think at its peak, probably the active core, who were people who were actually in the building covering stuff all the time, would maybe peaked out at around 75. And I think it was right after Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor. That really brought a lot of people into the Capitol, and they disappeared pretty quickly after that, too. Today, maybe, 30, 40? I think we're probably all alone. We're probably damn near half the Capitol Press Corps, aren't we? CalMatters, something like that? Yeah, it's not a big group anymore. Even the bigger papers like LA Times and everything, all those have shrunk, and then the small bureaus have all disappeared. I think maybe 30 or 40, something like that. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I think, maybe even 20 to 30, but yeah, I mean, when I was in the LA Times Bureau and Sacramento Bureau, there were 15 people there for Wilson and Davis years. So, and I didn't know how they count what's there now.
We had 12 at McClatchy for a long time, because they had also people there for Modesto B and the Fresno B, as well as the Sacramento B.
Yeah, you asked about the creators and the other sources in the future. I've been at several journalism conferences in the past couple of weeks where creators were a big theme. And creators are these people, maybe have their own Substack, they have their own YouTube channel, they're doing stuff on Instagram, on TikTok. They built their own audiences. A friend of mine's daughter's dog now has an endorsement campaign with a maker of dog products. Gets 15% every time somebody buys a dog thing off of his daughter's TikTok. So the difference is these people are now showing up at journalism conferences, and journalism is reaching out. At some point, you have to say, I don't do things the way they do, but if everybody's getting their information there, why the hell aren't we there in their faces doing this? And if that means we have to go meet people, introduce ourselves, like Kristen was saying during the last election, we went and found influencers who talk about California politics, introduced ourselves and said, we'd like to work with you, here's a bunch of information. Some of them want it, some of them don't. And you're never going to have a situation where everybody is credible or not, but the goal we have is to try to get good information in the hands of as many people who have an audience as possible.
I'm surprised that if you go on YouTube, there are about 3 or 4 YouTube, I guess you call them channels, that are devoted to California politics. And every one of them spews nothing but misinformation. I mean, it's just I just have to roll my eyes at some of the stuff you see on these people who are presenting what they present to be legitimate, revelatory journalism, and it's just crap. It really is.
You know who needs a YouTube channel? Dan.
So just quickly, I mean, I've always thought the future of journalism, I mean, nobody knows. But, as long as there is such a thing as a newspaper and a TV station and a radio station, we haven't crossed whatever this is going to be. Because you can get all those on your phone right now. And you can see right now radio stations are having digital text print content and you see, so I do think CalMatters is part of that. We're multimedia. We're on every platform we can find.
One last question. Over here.
One dynamic that we haven't yet touched upon is just the blurring of the lines between opinion and journalism within traditional newspapers and news sources. Obviously, Dan, you're a columnist, so you're somewhat, blur. But you, I think, have always taken the kind of old school columnist approach, which is you research issues and you talk to them with your kind of reporter skill and trade. But I think in a lot of other publications, there is just this blurring of the lines between opinion and news reporting. And I'm just wondering if anybody wants to address that.
I was a political writer at the LA Times for many years and an editor, and I got this question a lot, like how can you cover these issues and not have opinions about them? And this is, I'm just going to speak for myself, how I came to this, but, I think to me, journalism was certain calling, and you have a responsibility that creates an awe in you about the fear of doing this wrong. And I think that my thinking is if that the public will make a much better decision than I will. So my job is just to show them as much as I can about what I'm seeing, and then they'll make the right decision. And so that doesn't seem that hard to me as the reporter. I could sit and talk about a campaign for hours over drinks in a bar with everybody involved and never mention my opinion. It's all about, the analysis of what issues are gaining traction and what candidate is doing this well and not. And it's the stuff that people need to know, but it's not opinion. Having said that, I also think, we think about this all the time. I mean, there are rules and guidelines and practices that we have about the separation of different parts of the organization. You know, organizations that we partner with have to pass certain vetting, you know, where we, you know, it's a constant issue of how do you keep your journalism as pristine as you can.
Dan, any thoughts on the columnist role these days?
Well, yeah, I mean, columnists are, we columnists are kind of a strange species. There are not very many of us, for one thing. I started writing a column for the Sacramento Union in 1981. Like I said, the second column I wrote got sued for libel. Because, and this is why, that I had covered the Capitol then for about 5 years, and you know, there's the old saw in journalism, who, what, why, where, and when, right? All that kind of stuff. But the why of it is the most difficult part, because if you cover the Capitol in the traditional sense as a reporter, there's always people in the Capitol tell you why they're doing something. And they're mostly lying to you. And you know they're lying to you when they say it, but in the traditional story form, you're kind of stuck with that in a way. And so the writing a column, I thought, would be you could get into the why, and you weren't necessarily limited to what the players in the game were saying was why, and you could go into other things looking for motives, and not necessarily spurious motives or evil motives, but just why. Why is this happening? Why is this bill coming? Why is this bill coming up? Who is sponsoring this bill? Why do they want that bill thing? Who is opposing the bill? Why do they want it killed? What's the interest group? Why? And it's a very difficult question to answer fully in the traditional story form. And so I thought, well, I'd like to write a column and then be able to explain why, or at least speculate as to why things were happening. Not only what was happening, but why it's happening. And that's where the columnist, I think, comes in. And this is different than an editorial page, which is framing things as you should, or they should, or shouldn't. And that's a different sort of thing. I occasionally kind of drift over into that, I'm sure, but mostly I'm interested in the why. What's the background? What has happened? Where does this fit into the historical context of other things? What happened before and what's happening now? How is it different? Why is it different? Things like that.
Well, Dan, I want to thank you for bringing us more than 60 plus years of that context and explanation, 50 years covering the Capitol. And the last few at CalMatters, and Dave for bringing CalMatters to life and bringing Dan in when people thought he was retiring.
I'm sure as hell glad he did, too.
We all are. We all are.
I would have been covering my second profession, which would have been greeter at Walmart if I didn't have this job.
Yeah, nobody really sees you retiring. And Kristen for taking it from here to the places that we have to go and need to go if we're going to do a good job in the future. I want to thank everybody here for joining us, especially to the sponsors whose names were up on the screen before we mentioned. So grateful for all the folks who are supporting us, and for all of you for following this work, for reading, for complaining when it's appropriate, for following Dan and the stuff that we do. We can't do this without you, and that means your complaints and your input and your praise when it's due occasionally, probably rarely. And your support. We are a nonprofit. We live off of the donations that people who care about what we do provide to us. The sponsors you've already met here, people who are members of CalMatters. If you don't already get our newsletter, there's a QR code on the screen there. The second one on the bottom is to get our newsletter. It's free, comes out every day, gives you a quick read on what's going on, and some other stuff to read around the state. There are a lot of people who that's how they interact with CalMatters. It is mostly the newsletter every day. And then if you're interested in supporting us, we'd love to have you as a member. That's what the top QR code is there for. Most importantly, keep reading, keep paying attention, and keep on us with those good questions you're asking today, because we have a lot of work to do to get this right in the coming decades. So thank you all for being here. We appreciate it.